This is Paul Schmid. Welcome to the Pursuit Zone. In the summer of 2015, Jeremy Cronon set out on a 32,000-mile road trip through the USA. He wanted to better understand the American wilderness and its conservation ethic by visiting places we have chosen to protect. With his faithful companion Sam, a 2008 atomic blue Honda Element outfitted like a camper van, Jeremy explored 47 national parks. Over the 250-day adventure, he also visited state parks, cities, and connected with friends and family along the way. You can learn more about his travels at his website, chasingcairns.com. Jeremy Cronon, welcome to the Pursuit Zone.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
Jeremy, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin, but spent every summer up on Lake Superior in a small town called Bayfield. That's kind of where I feel like I grew up more than Madison.
How do you like Bayfield?
It's amazing. It's a town of about 475 people in the winter, and it balloons to over 2,000 during the summer. But I was lucky enough to spend my entire fourth grade year up there. So I made a lot of friends with the folks who live up there year-round, and those have been lasting relationships that I still love to this day.
One of the things that you write about is when you were 14, you went on a Knowles Course, which is National Outdoor Leadership School. Am I getting that? Am I even close?
Yep, no, that is correct. Yep, Knowles Course.
And you speak about how that sort of shaped you. Can you tell me again how that, what that meant to you?
Sure. The course I did was an adventure course for 14 and 15-year-olds, and it was a 30-day backpacking trip in the Wind River Mountains in Wyoming. And for me, it was the first time I'd ever really done anything that big. I didn't go to camp as a kid. I'd just gone up north and sea kayaked with my family a lot. So it was a big dip from life in Madison and life in Bayfield. And what that meant for me was first time in big mountains, first time out on my own, and I had really, really amazing role models out there as well. So we had 3 instructors, one of whom was named Josh McNary, and his way of seeing things, way of talking about things, way of leading us, there were 12 students, myself included. He showed me, or he created an environment where I felt like I could really thrive. And ever since that moment, I've focused my life on outdoor education and education in one way or another. But he's the one who kind of introduced me to the passion that I now devote my life to.
When I was looking through your bio on your website, you have a whole bunch of things that you say that you are. For example, you might say like, I'm a climber, I'm a so on and so on. But one of the things that you said was that you're a minimalist. And I wanted to get from your point of view, when you say that you're a minimalist, what does that mean to you?
For me, I think it means that simplicity is paramount. Complexity can often get in the way of so many of life's simpler truths and simpler pleasures. So for most of my life, I have, but even more so as I kind of pared down my existence into a car that only had 75 cubic feet, I had to make decisions based on what I needed and what I wanted. And I guess I've just been transitioning away from want and focusing on need. And when I do that, it's focusing on either things that are going to last for a long time, and or learning how to repair them myself, so I don't have to rely on larger systems to make sure that I can make it through each day. So I guess for me, minimalist just means that I am self-sufficient, using the least amount of physical possessions possible, and I'm just trying to lead a simple existence where my knowledge and my experiences govern my decisions more so than my possessions and those kind of things.
What sparked the idea to go on this big road trip?
That has a threefold answer. I did a big road trip with my family when I was a kid in 2003, where we spent 10,000 miles. We piled into a Honda Odyssey and just kind of headed off into the West. My dad is a professor of American history and environmental history. So he basically narrated the story of the West. And we went to national parks. We went up into the Canadian Rockies. We went sailing in Puget Sound for a week and went to the Grand Canyon, saw Zion, stayed with friends along the way, and camped a lot. That idea of the quintessential American road trip, that's where that grew out of for me, and using a car as a way to see vast swaths of country grew out of that trip. But I think when I realized that I really needed to do that trip for myself and expand upon it, that idea grew out of my time abroad during college. I studied abroad my junior year in Barcelona and realized that I was studying this other culture and visiting all these places in this foreign country when I still didn't fully grasp what it meant to be an American, what it meant for someone in Louisiana to be an American versus someone who lives in Washington versus someone who lives in Maine. What are those places? What can we learn from those places that helps create our sense of identity as Americans? So I guess that my time in Barcelona helped me realize I don't need to be traveling externally to learn about the world. I need to focus on my own country, learn about our complexities before kind of jump abroad and try learning about someone else. So that's when my focus shifted away from foreign travel to travel back here in the United States. And then the idea for the road trip, I knew I wanted to do a road trip, and I had a gap in my schedule between leaving my teaching job in North Carolina and starting and hopefully working toward the Knowles instructor course. And so I knew I wanted to do a road trip. I knew I wanted to see America, and decided to frame it around the national parks as a guiding principle.
It came time to choose a car. How did you choose a Honda Element?
It took a long time to decide on the Honda Element. I, like many people, wrote them off as cartoon cars for quite a long time. They look like they're built out of Legos and are not the most pleasing car to look at, or depends on your perspective, I guess. But originally I was looking at Subaru Outbacks and very capable hatchbacks that would give me a lot of room, but would also be able to handle off-road conditions. And the mechanic that my family's been going to for a long time encouraged me to try to hunt down an Element. And I laughed at him for a little while. And then I started doing my research online, seeing all these different build-outs that people had done to make them more like homes. And I was sold. Basically, after just 2 hours of Googling, I knew that was the car I had to have. And the problem is they stopped making them in 2011, which is also when they started to gain popularity. So now they have this almost cult following for people who want a very capable vehicle that you can basically hose down the inside of. And so I was going through Craigslist. I was searching all over the country trying to find an Element that seemed like it had low miles and was reasonably clean on the inside, and was having trouble until my mom actually met someone in Madison, where I'm from, and his name was Element Mike. And he has basically, after a previous career in sales, has devoted himself to finding Elements all over the country for people who really, really want to drive a Honda Element. I think at this point, he's probably sold well over 80 Elements, and he flies all over the country to auctions, buys the Element, drives it back to Madison, does all the cosmetic work, and brings it up to code in terms of mechanic and everything like that. And then he sells them. So I worked with him, and he basically found my dream car in about 2 weeks. And that's all she wrote. We've been together ever since.
Does Element Mike have a website?
Yep, mwmotorcars.com. His name is Mike Wenkman.
mwmotorcars.com. Why did you name the car Sam?
There were two reasons. One, there was a book I loved as a child called My Side of the Mountain. And it's about this kid from New York who in the city, and he gets sick of the city life, so he decides to run away from home, and he goes and lives in the Catskill Mountains or the Adirondacks. I'm not sure which one. And He lives in a tree stump, a burned out tree stump, and he makes it a home and is living in harmony with all of these animals up in the mountains who are helping to take care of him, and he's being a good steward of the forest as well. So that was inspirational for me as a child. He does all these amazing things of his own volition, just out in the woods by himself. And his name was Sam. So when I was poring over ideas of what to name this vehicle, my side of the mountain came up, and I was sold on it. But the second reason was, as we all learned in The Lord of the Rings, anyone who's going on a long journey, long, difficult journey, it's nice to have a Sam along with you when the going gets tough. So Lord of the Rings played a role as well.
You have to determine how to outfit Sam. How did you come up with your idea?
Like I was saying, there was this website, or there are lots of websites and YouTube videos all over the internet concerning Honda Elements and how best to turn them into tiny homes or micro RVs or whatever you want to call it. But the most amazing one is called the Element Owners Club. If you have any question you could possibly think of about the Element, if your engine is knocking, if your mileage isn't what you want it to be, if you are trying to find the perfect bike rack for it, you go on this website and someone has probably posted an answer to that question. I must have looked at 50 different designs for different box systems for the back of the car versus cot systems versus folding down seats, and kind of just picked certain elements that I really liked from some and combined them with other designs until I finally came up with something that seemed like it would work well for me.
How would you describe it?
It is a series of Birch Boxes that are two Birch Boxes on the sides of the back of the car, and then there is a channel running through the middle that doesn't have any, it's not enclosed, so I can slide things in and out of there. But on top of all of them, there are wooden lids that allow me to then sleep on top of it. So I have a cooking box, I have a hardware box, which is just smaller gear and electronics. Then I have a larger gear box that has tent and backpacks and things like that. And then I have a clothing box. And then in the middle trough, I have a 5-gallon water jug, and then just some other essentials. And then I also have an attic above the car, which is my Yakima Roof Box.
How tall are the boxes?
14 inches, I think. So it does not give me quite enough headroom to be able to sit up while I'm in bed, which is unfortunate. But it creates a bed platform that is about 52 inches wide, and with the seats forward, I have about 6 feet of length. So it's quite comfortable. 2 people can sleep in there, and I have 2 air mattresses on top, which makes for a very comfortable setup.
Do you have some kind of curtains?
I do, yeah. For the front and the back, I have bungee curtains that I just lock into hooks on the car ceiling and sides. And then to cover the side windows, I actually cut panels out of workout floor material. And then just kind of press those in, and the friction keeps them there. So they do not come down over the course of a night.
What's it like to live out of this for an extended period of time? What are the pluses, and what are the challenges of it?
The pluses are that you have a comfortable home anywhere that you are. You always have something familiar. You always have a space that you feel connected to. So I could be in the most remote area and still be sleeping in what I consider to be my home. That is an amazing thing to have when you're traveling, because there is at least some sense of consistency, even when the world around you is changing every single day. So that's great. I was able to store, I had everything that I needed in the car. I ended up having way more storage room than I thought I was going to. So having anything that I needed for an adventure, whether it was snowshoes or a hammock or stuff for the beach, stuff to climb a mountain, stuff to be in a city for a while, having all of that at your fingertips really just means the sky's the limit, and you can go wherever, whenever. Having an adventure mobile gives you a ton of freedom. The challenge is, I think the things that I miss the most were having a full kitchen. I do love to cook, and cooking when you're in a car is limited. I had a 2-burner and I had ways to clean up, but at the end of a long day of driving or at the end of a long day of hiking, the thought of assembling a kitchen, cooking, cleaning everything, and then disassembling that kitchen really held me back from doing that very often. There were definitely moments when I did, but I definitely noticed that I was not as keen on cooking every night. And if I did cook, it was a much simpler meals that did not require as much cleanup. So cooking was definitely something that I missed. Also, there is in the same way that being able to be in your home wherever you are is a bonus. You also have to deal with the place that you're in every single night. And I slept in a lot of Walmart parking lots, Home Depot parking lots, and national forests, Bureau of Land Management land, while I was sleeping in my car. And every night, regardless of where I was, there was about a 20-minute period where my brain was adjusting to the new sounds of that place. And I really do think that a part of my brain never turns off when I'm sleeping in the car, because I'm always subconsciously thinking about what would happen if this happened? What would happen if someone broke into my car? What happens if someone knocks on the window? So there's this subconscious unease that you definitely start to notice after sleeping in the car for a while.
Did you ever get hassled by the police?
I never got hassled by the police. I was very mindful about choosing places that I knew were at least marginally legal to sleep. And the only time I got hassled was when I parked in a Walmart where I knew they discouraged overnight parking. And a guy rolled by who was I think probably worked at the Walmart at 5 a.m. and told me that I had to head out, and that was fine by me. But yeah, I never had any run-ins with the police, at least for sleeping in the car.
So not all Walmarts are overnight parking friendly.
No, only about 80% of them are, and that doesn't necessarily have to do with a decision that Walmart's making. It has to do more with local zoning laws. So whether the city allows overnight parking dictates whether the Walmart can allow it or not. And then there are other Walmarts that have had issues with overnight parking. There was one in North Dakota that actually had a significant police presence when I showed up, and I didn't end up sleeping there. But it was because oil workers from the Bakken oil fields who had been recently laid off had just moved to the Walmart, and there had been problems with prostitution. I think there had been a shooting and drug troubles too. So all of that within this Walmart parking lot economy of laid off oil workers. That was a specific example as to why that Walmart was not allowing people to park there overnight.
When I was reading through your website, I saw that looks like you put a lot of thought into your route. And how did you ultimately come up with the best way to kind of route yourself around when you're visiting all these places? Because I'm assuming at the same time, you want to take a route that's scenic, but also is fuel efficient.
I must admit that fuel efficiency was not my main priority. And in my mind, I justified that by telling myself that I didn't own a car for 2 years before this trip. So that justifies my magnified carbon footprint over the course of this trip. When your goal is to see as much of America as possible, fuel efficiency needs to fall by the wayside, because I did want to take slower roads. I wanted to take windier roads. I wanted to take roads that might be off the beaten track. And those aren't going to be as efficient as interstates in terms of getting you from point A to point B. So one of the rules that I followed was that except on rare occasions when I needed to use an interstate to get to a certain location or into a city, for a very short period of time, I would not travel on the interstate. And that meant that I basically planned each day, either that day or the day before. I knew generally that I was heading in the direction of this city or of this park, but I would pull out the map and see what things lay in between point A and point B, and then route to whatever interested me. And sometimes that meant, yep, you're going straight through and hopefully something exciting pops up. But other times it was, oh, this highway looks like it's scenic on the map, which is marked by a dotted line alongside the road. That may be a bit out of my way, but of course I'm going to take that one versus the other option. So the great thing about it was, yes, I knew where I was going on a larger scale. Like I knew I would be in LA in February. But how I got from San Francisco to LA was entirely dependent on what parks lay in between, what people lay in between, and what other things interested me. And that would be a decision that maybe came a week in advance, but was often a day or two beforehand. I'd be like, oh, that looks like a great option. And it also allowed me to ask people in the places where I was what I should be looking for as I'm traveling.
Speaking of maps, you mentioned that you prefer to use paper maps over, say, Google Maps on a smartphone. Tell me about that.
Definitely. I think I've always been intrigued by maps, probably ever since Knowles and since my childhood. Knowles does a lot of navigating using USGS quads. So I had a pretty good understanding of how they worked and how to navigate using maps. And then as my family traveled on road trips, we would use maps. But then I think in high school, and as smartphones started to become more and more popular, I definitely lost some of that. I lost some of that connection to maps. And I remember vividly I drove from Madison to Lewiston, Maine, which is where I went to school at Bates College, which is about a 23-hour drive. And I had my friend Fergus drove from Denver, Colorado to Madison to pick me up. And then we drove straight through to Lewiston. And the entire time, one of us had our phone going, showing us the way. And I remember that next morning when I called my dad and told him, hey, we drove through the night and we're at Bates. And he said, what route did you take? And I had absolutely no idea what to tell him. I'd been following the blue line complacently the entire night, and I didn't know if we had gone through Connecticut. I didn't know where we'd gone. And ever since then, I've felt a need to kind of separate myself from relying so heavily on the GPS. I still think it's an amazing tool, but I don't think it should govern everything that you do while you're on a trip. So I made a conscious decision to buy a National Geographic road atlas, and that's what I used when I was in the car. Obviously, I would use GPS when I was in cities to try to get to different places that my map's scale didn't allow me to see. But by and large, I was using the atlas, and it gave me, there was so much more of a sense of place. I knew what direction I was going. I knew what I was going by. I could see what was around me, whereas the blue line of the GPS is really limiting, and you only get to see probably a mile on either side depending on where your scale is at. So there could be cities that you've heard of from books, or parks that you know you would like to see, but if you're zoomed in enough on your GPS, those things are completely invisible to you. And that was because I was so free in my schedule and able to take advantage of the places that I was in. I knew that maps would allow me to do that.
I pulled out a quote from your blog. This is the quote: "Chance has played an integral role in the success of my journey." What do you mean by that?
There were many, many moments on my trip where I felt like the universe was conspiring to send me forward, to keep me going. And whether that took the form of a friend in Boston getting off of work 3 hours before she thought she was going to, so that we could spend more time together, or whether that meant showing up in Yosemite right when the firefall, which is this amazing moment or a couple of days that happens every February, where the angle of the setting sun is such that it illuminates Horsetail Falls and it looks like this glowing red firefall. I showed up just in time for that. And then by the time I was in Death Valley, just a couple of weeks later, the super bloom, one of the most epic blooming seasons of desert flowers, I think recorded in 100 years, just happened to be happening as I wandered through the park. So I didn't try to plan a lot of things, but I got lucky a lot. And those are just a few of the countless times where I was like, wow, I could not have timed this better if I had tried to.
You connected with quite a few people on your journey. How important was that to you as a part of this versus, say, if you hadn't have met up with any of those and if it was just you and the wilderness?
My intention going into this trip was obviously to, like you said, to better understand American wilderness ethic and conservation ethic by looking at the places that we've chosen to protect. But like I said when I was talking about where this idea for the road trip came from, I also wanted to better understand America in general. And yes, you can do a lot of that by simply visiting places and seeing them, but I think it's much more difficult to get a sense of what Seattle is like unless you spend time on who's living in Seattle. So for me, the trip represented an amazing opportunity to reconnect with. I think I hit by the end over 200 friends from different phases of my life, whether that was high school, college, trip leading. They're scattered all over the country. And being able to see someone in their home, see someone in the place, in the community that they call home, gives you an insight into that community and that place that you is really difficult to get if you are just going there as an outsider and do not get that insider perspective. So, I mean, partially for my own sanity, I wanted to see all these people, but it definitely helped deepen my understanding of the places that I was moving through.
Let's talk a bit about the parks themselves. And I know because there's so many of them, these questions can be kind of sometimes, I don't know, either tough to ask or tough to answer. But so I just wrote my questions like this, what 3 park experiences provided the best memories for you?
The one that immediately comes to mind is I was in Great Sand Dunes National Park, which is in Colorado. And one of the amazing things about this park is there are these 700-foot dunes that just rise out of the plains, and it just looks like these waves of sand nestled up against this mountain range. And the really cool thing is that you can actually camp on the dunes for free. You just have to move far enough away from the popular areas that you're not going to be camping in the middle of the places where other people are using the dunes. And so I was like, yes, this is an experience I cannot miss out on. So I pack up my stuff. By this point, it's November, so it's getting a little chillier. So I pack for a cold night, and I head out onto the dunes, set up my tent. And as I'm setting up my tent, I realized that I did not bring a freestanding tent, and so my tent needed to be tensioned out with stakes really aggressively for it to stay in its shape. And that's really hard to do on sand dunes. And I did not have the right kind of stakes to do it. So I added extra stakes and haphazardly tried to keep my tent up. I went away and I watched the sun set, and then I came back, hopped into bed, and by about 10 p.m. I knew that the winds, which grow every single night and are shaping the environment that I'm currently sleeping in, were going to blow my tent over. And so instead of having that happen while I was inside it, I ended up packing everything back into my backpack and then hiking out while in the middle of the night. And the amazing thing is that the Sangre de Cristos mountains are just to the east of Great Sand Dunes, and they were actually hiding the moonlight. So I was walking out under like one of the most intense Milky Ways that I have ever seen. And I decided not to use a headlamp. My footing was very unstable because I was walking on sand and very loosely packed sand. And so as I was walking, I would be walking up a dune sideways and then kind of slipping down over the next ridge. It was very eerie and disconcerting because my footing was never stable. But I will never forget that hike out. I basically just used one star and charted in that direction. And it was one of the most amazing night hikes I've ever done. Another experience that is truly memorable for me was probably when I went into Carlsbad Caverns for the first time. I had been at Mammoth Cave already in Kentucky, and Mammoth Cave is amazing because it has 452 miles of subterranean tunnels. It's a cave on an epic scale. And so when I went to Carlsbad, I didn't really know what to expect. How would it be different? How would it be similar? And instead of the scope of Carlsbad is very different than the scope of Mammoth. Everything at Carlsbad Caverns is massive. So you walk into the natural entrance, and the cave ceiling above you is hundreds of feet above you. And you're in this giant tunnel that is cutting down into the earth. And then when you get to the bottom, you're in another massive cavern that could hold 6 football fields. So it may not have had the winding tunnels of Mammoth Cave, but the sheer scope of Carlsbad Caverns is mind-boggling. And the fact that I was there in the off-season meant that there were very few other people there. Another truly incredible spot. And then the third one, on an entirely different level, my time in Joshua Tree left me feeling things about a national park that I hadn't felt before at any other park. I was in Joshua Tree for a week, and unlike any other park, there are actually climbers who basically live in Joshua Tree. One guy named Hobo Greg, who felt like the informal mayor of Hidden Valley, which is where all these climbers are based. He'd been living in a cave for 4 months and just climbing every day. But there's a sense of community in Joshua Tree that is absent in almost every other park. These climbers, self-described dirtbags, people living out of their cars, go to Joshua Tree, especially in the early months or late months of winter, and just climb all the time. And going there, I immediately pulled up into this parking lot, and within 2 minutes, there was someone asking me, "Oh, so do you live out of your car?" And I said yes, and I showed him around my vehicle, and then within 15 minutes, there were 4 or 5 other people who were also living out of their cars, and we basically did a who's who of dirtbags in Joshua Tree and a home and garden tour of everyone's vehicle. It wasn't Joshua Tree is beautiful, but what I remember most about Joshua Tree is the sense of community that I found there, which I had not found yet in any other park.
When you got a tour of these vehicles, did you pick up any tips for your own?
Totally. One thing that I hadn't thought about was one of these guys. He had just bought a car, and he was living in it in an empty shell. So there was nothing inside it yet except his gear. He hadn't built any of the elements that would become his home. And he said he wanted to live in the vehicle first and live in that space before he designed anything for it. And in retrospect, that makes a ton of sense. I was lucky enough that the system that I built actually did work very well for my style of travel. But that made a ton of sense to me, to live in a space before you figure out how you want to outfit it.
Okay, what about the other side, Jeremy? What about some of the parks that provided the most challenges for you?
When I mentioned Carlsbad Caverns, I mentioned that being there in the off season was a blessing because it meant that I had some time to myself in that park, and that there were not overwhelming crowds. But that was also a curse at other parks. Glacier is one of the most amazing parks in the United States. I've been there before and like completely fell in love with it. But when I was there, I actually got to see another side of it. Going to the Sun Road was closed. It was January, and the temperatures were across Montana. At night it got down to about -25. So frigid nights, and then the days were not warm by any means. And when I got to Glacier, once again I was very alone, but also limited in what I could do and what I felt safe doing. So I could snowshoe around for a couple of hours, but I did not want to get myself into a situation that I could not get myself out of. Didn't think that I could count on other people in the park to help out, and I wasn't sure that whatever emergency systems I had in place would be fast enough to help me in that kind of environment. So yeah, there were certain parks where I was limited by the time of year that I went there. That was true in Mesa Verde as well. I wasn't able to go into any of the kivas because they had already been closed for the season. Those were some of the most challenging aspects for me. I was also in Grand Canyon over Easter. And so that timing brought with it an entirely different problem, that it was wildly overcrowded. I think it's just a matter of perspective. I don't think any of the parks really provided any challenge that I didn't see as something that made sense because of the time of year that I was there, or something that would either be fun to tackle or fun to learn from. So I may be forgetting something, like the mosquitoes in the Everglades. Yes, that is challenging. It tests your patience. But by and large, I think I was there to learn from the parks, and those challenging situations are exactly what I was looking for.
What park surprised you the most?
Easy. That's my favorite question to get. Hands down, no questions asked, Big Bend in Texas. I think a lot of it has to do with my own, I don't want to say prejudices going in, but whatever I thought Texas would be like. I'd visited parts of Texas before, but had never been to Western Texas. And I couldn't visualize what this huge park along the Rio Grande would be like. And so when I got there and I saw the Chisos Mountains and I saw Off Balance Rock and I saw all these amazing places, I had no frame of reference, so I was completely blown away. It is one of the largest national parks, yet one of the least visited. It is isolated. It's right across, Mexico is right across the Rio Grande, and it is nowhere near any major population center in Texas. So the people who are there are people who are actively trying to get to Big Bend. It is not on some national park circuit where you hit Grand Teton, Yellowstone, Glacier, and go to the Pacific Northwest. No, anyone who's at Big Bend is there to be in Big Bend. And not that many people make it down there. But the flora are amazing, or the flora is amazing. The birds are amazing. The fact that it's so isolated also means that the stars are amazing. And for someone who's living out of their car, the fact that you can backcountry car camp is pretty incredible too. So I could drive 5 miles down an undeveloped road, and I would be the only person sleeping out there. And that's a pretty incredible and rare thing in this day and age.
If you were to do this trip all over again, what would you do differently? And maybe let me narrow the question down a bit. What would you do differently from a point of view of your gear?
I basically did 2 loops. I did an East Coast loop and came back to Madison for Christmas. And then I did a West Coast loop and ended in Wyoming, where I was doing my Knowles instructor course. But what that meant is that I could have a set of gear for the fall and then have a set of gear for the winter. The problem I ran into in Colorado in November was that I didn't have some of my winter gear with me. So I didn't have my really, really warm sleeping bag. I didn't have some of the snow camping gear that I would want. So that was a limiting factor for me as I visited places like Rocky Mountain National Park. So I think that is something that I would have changed. Another thing that I would have changed is actually I skipped Isle Royale National Park in the eye of Lake Superior because it would have been the first park that I would have visited. And I would have had to leave my car for like 4 or 5 days in a parking lot in Michigan. And at that point, I just did not feel comfortable doing that. Nowadays, I leave my car all kinds of places and do not think twice about it just because I've had very good experiences with that. Now I do have to go back to Isle Royale and do that one again. Do that one for the first time because I did not feel comfortable doing it on the first run around.
What's your favorite piece of gear?
I can't really go anywhere without my camera, which is a Sony NEX6. But the piece of gear that really revolutionized my work as a photographer is called the Peak Design Capture Clip. And it is basically a clip that you can put on a backpack strap or on your belt, and you put a little base plate on the bottom of your camera, and then you can very quickly lock your camera into that clip wherever you have it located. And for me, what that meant was I was taking my camera everywhere with me, and it was always accessible, so I could just release it, take a picture, and click it back on in less than 4 seconds. Have a picture in less than 4 seconds, as opposed to having to dig it out of a backpack or anything like that. So I think that piece of gear changed my photography in a very fundamental way. But the Patagonia Houdini wind jacket is the most miraculous piece of gear on the planet, in my opinion. It weighs like 4 ounces, keeps the sun off of you, keeps you warm. It'll even help in a light rainstorm. I will never go anywhere without it.
I learned about you through a New York Times article, and I'm wondering, what has that New York Times article done for you? Obviously, it put you and me in touch. What else has happened? Anything more positive things that have happened to you because of that article?
Yeah, I did a radio interview for a national public radio station based out of Philly, and a couple other little pieces for magazines. But what I think more important than whatever is happening now, I think what it does is it validates my work as a writer, and as someone who is going to continue traveling and writing about their adventures and going places and seeing things and doing things. Having a foot in the door allows me opportunities to continue writing and to continue having a voice, which I see as very, very valuable. And so I think that's something that I look forward to as I plan the next trip. So that's big for me.
What happened to Sam?
Oh, I'm still living in Sam. We're still doing well. He'll be with me as I travel until I think mid-November, and then I'm actually, for the first time in well over a year, going to get on an airplane and fly to Los Angeles from Chicago as opposed to drive, just because it makes a lot more sense since I'm going down to Baja and then have another trip planned after that. And I'm going to leave Sam in Madison for the winter so that he doesn't have to be left on the street in Los Angeles.
Somebody else might move into him.
Exactly.
Occasionally in these interviews, I ask people about their logos because something catches my eye about it. And when I first saw your logo for Chasing Cairns, I just thought it was a pile of rocks. But when I read through your website, and you touched about this, the leader of the trip when you were 14 years old, I looked at your logo and I noticed it looks like it's a guy sitting, the rocks on top are of a guy sitting cross-legged on top of this sort of mountain. Is that what it's supposed to be?
It is. It's a man meditating, but he is supposed to be in the form of a cairn.
Yeah, I love that. It's a great idea. Did you think of that?
I actually did not. I cannot take full credit. I knew that I wanted a cairn to be the central part of the logo, but my uncle, who knows me very, very well, is a visual artist, and I sent him my concept and showed him the website that I was building at the time, and he said, give me 2 weeks and I'll come up with a couple options for you. And he, the next day, sent me that, and I was sold. It's exactly what I wanted, because I think, for me, cairns are this amazing representation of this. They're basically trail markers. So in a place where the trail may be hard to find, or you're walking on a rock and there can't be a trail, other hikers and travelers will create these sometimes massive piles of stone, but they're often not very large, and they're this communal effort to keep people on the right track. I think that is a really beautiful concept. But I also, one of my main goals for this trip was to be a very mindful traveler and a mindful participant in this journey. And so having that meditative and thoughtful person sitting on top of that cairn really encapsulated exactly what I was going for.
Jeremy, what's next for you?
So I'll be on the East Coast for the fall, visiting friends and working my way south. And then I'm going down to Baja for a 2-week sea kayaking seminar with Knowles that will get me assessed as a sea kayaking instructor. And then my plans just finalized for a 5-month trip to New Zealand. So I will be headed down to New Zealand on December 13th and coming back in late April.
Wow, that's going to be an amazing trip.
I will definitely have to work along the way picking fruit. But I've dreamed of going to New Zealand ever since I first saw the Lord of the Rings movies.
You're going to be woofing?
I haven't decided yet. I will have a work visa, so I will also be able to get paid jobs as well. But I'll basically just be burning through whatever savings I have left until I need to figure out another gig, and then work for a little while, and then keep traveling. So that's the plan for the spring, and then back to the Rocky Mountains to Knowles again in the summer.
How can people find out about you online if they want to learn more?
The best way, I'm currently redoing my website, so I am not posting as much on it right now, but as soon as after this fall, I will relaunch, and there will be a lot of content coming up, and that website is www.chasingcairns.com. But I'm also, probably my most consistent presence is on Instagram, and that is just @chasingcairns. And I do a lot of photography on there, and keep more of a steady update of where I am and what I'm doing. So those are probably the best ways. I'm also on Twitter, but I don't do very much on that.
Jeremy Cronon, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing the story of your 32,000-mile road trip through the U.S. I appreciate it, and I want to say good luck to you in your photography and your writing endeavors, and also on this big trip to New Zealand.
Thanks a lot, Paul. It was great talking to you.
Recorded September 29th, 2016. For more great podcasts, visit thepursuitzone.com.